Good morning and welcome to the December 2020 meeting of the Food Standards Agency's Business Committee. As you can see, we are once again meeting virtually, and for the purpose of the record, the meeting takes place in Cambridge. Could I ask if any colleagues have any conflicts of interest that they'd wish to declare? And no one has raised any AOB with me, so unless somebody waves frantically, there won't be any other business. Minutes of our meeting on the 23rd of September. These have been circulated to business committee members for informal comment. Can I take it that we are happy to accept them as a correct record of the meeting? Thank you. And the actions arising are all complete. Was there anything else that a board member wished to pick up on the minutes that might not be covered elsewhere on the agenda? In which case, I'll hand over to the Chief Executive for her report. Emily.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everybody. You have the Chief Executive's report in front of you, and I talk about COVID and the health and safety of our staff, the fact that we are close to signing an updated memorandum of understanding with Food Standards Scotland, and I give details of the litigation that we've done recently. But the thing I wanted to major on most actually was the first paragraph about funding. So just to say a little bit more, so we have secured a funding for next year of just under £106 million. If it's possible to feel both relieved and worried at the same time, or relieved and disappointed at the same time, I think that's how we feel about it. So we're relieved that we weren't offered a flat cash settlement, which was where things started in terms of the offer from the Treasury. And we're also relieved that our baseline has gone up. So our baseline had originally been about £86 million. And then for the last couple of years, we've had 14 or so on top of that for EU exit. Actually, the Treasury have confirmed that EU exit funding is now in our baseline. So our baseline is now set at that 106. We also are relieved that this split between programme and administration has ended, and we'll just have an administration budget. And actually, to us, that's worth between £1 and £2 million a year. We had been struggling to spend some of our programme money because we couldn't via it into the administration budget, and that gives us much more flexibility to prioritise between work streams. So we're relieved about that. The reason why we're disappointed is because we think we did a cracking bid. We were ready for a 3-year settlement. We had a big programme of reform around regulatory reform, on food hypersensitivity, on our operational transformation, and embedding the new responsibilities that we take on after the end of the transition period. So we were sad not to completely persuade the Treasury of all of that, but we will regroup and make a big effort for next year. But we also are anxious about the funding that goes to local authorities. I think we'll come to that in due course in the agenda. We were able to make our voice heard in the conversations that Treasury were having with the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and we think that will have had a bit of an impact, but we're still anxious about it for the long run. So I just want to finish on that bit about funding, just to say a big thank you to the team who pulled that bit together. So Sam Faulkner, Martin Brewer, Alice Biggins, our economists, all the programme teams. It was a big effort across the whole agency. And it does put us in a reasonable place for next year. But obviously we have more ambitious things that we want to be doing to try and make food you can trust.
Emily, thank you very much for that. There's so much in your report that I'm sure colleagues on the business committee would welcome, but I think from board members, we'd particularly like to say the content here about the FSA being a good place to work, the family-friendly culture, the support that there has been, perhaps signalled by things like high number of applicants for really key jobs. Lots of indicators here in advance of the People Survey. I recognise that despite the challenges of COVID-19 and the pressure that's been on our staff for more than 12 months, when you think about our last preparation for the Brexit date, it really is excellent to see that we've managed to keep motoring forward with those issues, with our support for our networks, diversity and inclusion networks, etc. Really, really valuable. So thank you for that. In terms of questions, Timothy.
Thank you very much. Well done on the settlement. I think that's a fantastic outcome. It has to be viewed in the context of what's happening more widely in government funding. So I think it's a resounding well done. But I understand the disappointment as well. My specific question goes on later into your report, actually. So I hope I could take that now. And it was just around staff welfare and health. And I was really pleased to see the focus on staff health and well-being. I suppose two questions. One was just around the influenza vaccinations and just to understand a little bit better what level of reach you'd managed. Obviously, it's people's own choice whether they have flu vaccinations, but I wondered how successful that's been. And I guess also, as a second question, thoughts about whether or not the arrangements around flu vaccination are possibly going to help a programme around COVID vaccination as it becomes available to our staff. Many of our staff are vital to obviously the food industry and food quality, and so it's obviously important they stay well and safe. And I wonder what your thoughts are about that. Thank you.
I'm going to let Dave have his comments as well, and then we'll come back to Emily. Dave.
Thanks. Going back to the comprehensive spending review, just a couple of questions. One, just wonder when we might have an opportunity to assess the impact that's going to have on our investment plans for next year around the regulator, the ABC programme, around the food sensitivity and around the scientific evidence that we were looking to build in those areas and others. And also what capacity we've got to, I suppose, use our underspend in the current financial year to sort of pump prime some of those activities in the final quarter, or I should say the first quarter of 2021.
Emily?
Great, thank you for those excellent questions. So Timothy, on the flu vaccines, so we did offer to pay for flu vaccines for people if they couldn't access it on the NHS. And we've had a limited take-up. Colin will remind me, I think it's about 40 people, is that right, Colin? Maybe I've forgotten that.
It's now about 50, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But what we were finding certainly a few weeks ago that people were struggling to access the vaccinations even privately. Actually, we did a check-in with staff yesterday, and there's been quite a shift in the last few weeks. So people are able to access them much more easily. In fact, lots of people are getting them on the NHS. So we're confident that it was available if people needed it, but people are able to access the flu vaccinations if they need it now as well through the NHS. On the broader vaccination for COVID, obviously it's incredibly early days, really exciting day to day with the first vaccinations being given. We expect... We're particularly concerned about our staff in food processing establishments, meat hygiene staff. A lot of them actually are older members of staff, so they're likely to get swept up in the vaccinations that happen for the age groups as they go down through the ages. But we're also plugged into DEFRA's conversations with Public Health England and others where food processing is being considered as a priority group. But there's obviously a lot of people in front of the queue. Colin, I don't know if you want to comment more on that point.
Yes, so obviously the government's rollout, there's a phased rollout and it's age related. In terms of our staff, the first phase of government rollout will extend down to 50 years and over. 75% of our frontline MHI staff are over 50 years of age. And also in phase one, of course, those who are clinically vulnerable will also be included. And as Emily has highlighted, there'll be a second phase in several months' time, and that will look at particular occupations. And the food industry is being considered, as Emily has said, DEFRA are in those conversations.
Thanks, Colin. And then on Dave's question, so the process we're going through at the moment is the business planning process. We're reviewing all our budgets right now. We'll be taking that through my executive team in the next few weeks. We come to you on our board retreat to give you a first sense of that in January. And then in March, we bring you formal proposals for our budgets for next year for you to sign off, just to check that we've allocated in accordance with with the priorities you've set. My intention, however, just to be clear now, is to try and put more resource into the achieving business compliance side of things, and particularly the regulatory compliance division, than we have had this year, because I think that is under-resourced at the moment. And secondly, to keep trying to build the work on food hypersensitivity. We've put quite a lot more staff into that this year. They're really starting to motor. You saw them last week. So they've had, I think it's 8 or 10 additional staff there. That's making a difference. We just want to make sure that they are getting some additional help. So we'll be looking at other budgets, seeing what we can skim off to put into those particular areas. And then capacity to use underspend. So we have actually applied to the Treasury. You'll know in public finances that you're meant to spend all the money you're given each year. There's no possibility to move it across to the following year. Actually, we have applied to the Treasury to do a budget exchange, to take a look. We can do it up to a minimum percentage, to see if we can take a little bit of our underspend into next year, which again will help, particularly with some of that investment that we're thinking about. I don't think we've heard back yet, unless Chris wants to correct me on that.
Emily, no, that's right. We're expecting to hear back, hopefully before Christmas.
Thank you. I was just going to pick up one small point there. Colin mentioning the percentage of our frontline meat hygiene inspectors who are over 50. Of course, we've already recognised the challenge that presents by starting to look at how we might modernise those frontline operations for the future. Robin and then Colin.
Thank you, Heather. Just quickly on Dave's point to add, you mentioned about the impact on long-term science budgets, Dave. So this is obviously something that spreads far beyond just FSA, and actually one of the things we're doing quite actively with other departments at the CSA level is talking about things that we might have all wanted to do and work in our SR bids that haven't been funded. And a particular example of that, I think, is the genome surveillance, for which we had big ambitious plans, which was shared by DEFRA and in fact by FCDO. And so the three of us are now in a conversation about whether we might still be able to push some of that activity forward, despite the fact that we've all got less than we might have hoped. So it's not all completely negative, hopefully.
Thank you, Colin.
Chair, thank you. And Emily, thank you for the report. And I would echo the comments made earlier by the Chair on some of the fantastic work done, particularly around the senior recruitment and just the level of interest that was shown in that. A couple of questions that I had have already been addressed, and I'll address some more of them a bit later in the meeting at Chris's bit. But specifically around the settlement, the financial settlement, and the fact that we haven't had a settlement yet from Wales and Northern Ireland. I mean, is there any expectation? I know that our finance minister in Northern Ireland was quite disappointed with the allocation, but in some respects, that's the role of a finance minister in a devolved administration, is to be disappointed with whatever we get. But I just wonder, in that basis, do we expect to get flat cash, or is there any expectation that we will get what we need in the two devolved administrations?
Chris, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Heather. We're currently working closely with the devolved parts of the organisation, and I think it would be fair to say, obviously, we never get all the resources that you need, but we're working closely with all the stakeholders on that at the moment.
Okay. And when is there any indication as to when we expect a result from either Cardiff or Belfast?
I think, Colin, we're hoping for an update fairly soon, but I can come back to you with an exact date.
Yeah, no, that'll be. It's really just the planning, ideally ahead of January.
I think we'll certainly know by January, Colin. My impression on the Wales side, anyway, is that we're very close to hearing. We had gone to ministers last week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't think there are any more questions. In which case, I just wanted to record the board members' thanks to Paul Morrison, whose last meeting this is. Paul, it's been very fleeting, but it's been a high-value touch point. So thank you very much for taking this pit stop in your career to support the FSA. I hope you found it a really enjoyable experience. We've loved having you on the senior team here, and you can point to many areas where you've helped shape our thinking and accelerate our progress strategically. So we are very grateful to you for that.
Thank you very much, Heather. I'm grateful to you and fellow board members for all the engagement and support. So thank you very much.
I hope the next posting is as good. I can't imagine it will be, but you know where we are. We'll move on now.
No, not a patch.
We'll move on to the performance and resources report. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Just a few things to draw out from the report, which I'll take as read. It's the Q2 performance report, which focuses on our key priorities. As in the last quarter, it's a mixture of both our performance on COVID as well as our performance on business as usual, which has clearly been impacted by COVID throughout the quarter. Slides 5 and 6 show that 9 milestones in our key programmes and priorities have been affected by COVID. However, we still believe that these will be ultimately landed as expected. Slides 7 and 8 relate to local authorities, and I'm proposing that we take any questions relating to local authorities in the next paper, which focuses on their performance and delivery. Slide 9 relates to FSA's FBO audits, and you'll have seen that there's been a large increase in the number of audits that we've managed to complete in Q2, which has risen to 109 in Q2 from 11 in Q1. Slide 12 shows the improving trend on diversity in the FSA. And Emily's report actually picked up on some of the focus that we've been doing, particularly on ethnicity in that area. Slide 13 to 15 on resources we've already talked about. Just to clarify that the budget exchange numbers that we've applied to Treasury for, which we hope to get notice on by the end of December, are not included in those numbers. So that would reduce the underspend by approximately 2 million. I'm happy to take any questions.
Chris, thank you very much. And just to agree, we'll take any questions, points about local authority performance in our detailed paper on that, if we may. Comments, questions from board members. Colm.
Chair, thank you. Just a couple of questions, Chris, as you went through the presentation there. Firstly on the audit activity and the welcome increase in audit activity. Have we been able to maintain that with FBOs in Q3 to the extent that you know the answer to that? I know we've had a lockdown in the middle of all of that, so that may have been a bit more difficult, but just how have we been able to progress that in Q3? And then my second questions are around the financials, really, and it's just trying to tie together the 103 versus this year's limit of 126, 103 for next year, which was roughly a 3% uplift. And just to sort of clarify how that compares to the 126, and how do we break? I know there's capital in there as well, but how do we break that down? And I suppose final question back to Dave's earlier question about the ability. And yes, I get that we've applied for a little bit of year-end flexibility in relation to some of that, but is there any opportunity to sort of bring forward spend in the last fiscal quarter of this year?
Colin, do you want to pick up some of those comments about Q3?
Yes, I can, Heather. Yes. So in the main, yes, is the answer, Colin. We've completed up until the end of last week. We've completed 236 full audits for the financial year. So as Chris has highlighted, we did around 100 in Q2. So yes, we have continued more or less the same pace in Q3 to date. Of course, we're now in the winter plan. We're not sure how that will impact in Q4 with pressures on our staff. But at the moment, yes, we've been able to do so.
And Emily, I think you might have wanted to pick up some of that as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I think the difference between the 103 and 126 column is because we haven't added in the Wales and Northern Ireland funding yet to the total amount. So that explains why it looks such a gap. But it will get better. And in terms of underspend this year, so we have been bringing forward some things. So, for example, we're using some consultants to help us with thinking about mapping the food sector for our achieving business compliance work. What we're finding, however, is that overseeing the consultants and making sure they get sufficient strategic input is really difficult because people are so stretched with the preparation for the transition period and ending and for the COVID-19 work. So all of our kind of hopes that we would be able to outsource some of our work this year haven't completely come to pass. We're doing a bit, but not as much as we would have liked.
Margaret and then Timothy.
I think this is probably one for Chris, or possibly Emily, and it's a pretty impossible one, really. You mention in your report that timescales for negotiation and development of physical infrastructure at borders continues to make delivery challenging on EU transition. And I wondered if there were any particular financial risks or other risks that you're worried about, Chris, that we may not have foreseen.
We'll pick that up when we've heard from Timothy as well.
Thanks, Heather. Just a quick one about the food hygiene scores. Obviously, there's been a reduction in the number of inspections. We've got a growth in new food businesses. We've got local authorities understandably stretched, and we've got labs under pressure. And I guess one of the issues around public trust will be whether or not there's been any increase in incidences if we were to look back. And I just wondered if there's plans to keep that under review.
Thank you. I'll let Chris pick up Margaret's point, and then I'll decide who's going to pick up the other one.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, Margaret, in terms of the financial aspects of work at the border and EU transition, I don't think there's any particular financial issues that we see. There's still some capacity this year in the Northern Ireland budget, you'll see from the report, which is currently set at 0.9 million. And also, because the Northern Ireland border relates to GB wide, we could deploy resource from the Westminster budget as well to do certain aspects of that. I think it's more, as you say, the fact of being able to operationally get things up and running in the timeline. In terms of any spend for next year, clearly we've had the win of rolling over the 14.6 million in the Westminster budget. That's part of our baseline now, so that's going to help in terms of EU exit. So I don't think the issues are particularly financial, although I don't know if Emily or Rebecca or Paul want to say more on that.
Emily, Rebecca, Paul?
I'd quite like to come in. Yeah, just so our current presumptions on spend rely on our assumptions about the programme and what will happen at the border. If any of those turn out to be wrong, then we may find ourselves with additional cost, particularly if the role of local authorities, so district councils in Northern Ireland, is just much greater than we expected. Now, we don't anticipate that happening, but it's possible. So we will have to see. I mean, I would expect if we were in that situation, we would just go back to the Treasury and to the Northern Ireland government and explain the situation. So I don't feel worried about it, but we have made a number of assumptions about our budget and the spend based on the planning assumptions we've applied to our EU exit transition work.
I was just coming back on Timothy's point as well about incidents. There are some stats actually on slide 10 about the number of incidents we've handled in Q2, and they're lower than normal. Our foodborne disease tracking, that's annual data, so we won't have that yet, I wouldn't have thought. But there's been no indication yet that we've seen any increase in foodborne disease outbreaks at this stage. It's going to be interesting to see whether better personal hygiene is improving the rate. Emily?
Just to add on that, so we would expect to look at that next summer. We look about 6 months in arrears at that foodborne disease data, and we are seeing fewer incidents, but the causes for that are many, and one of them may be that there are fewer people going to their GPs with symptoms, so it may just be underreporting. It may also be that there's less foodborne disease. So obviously we continually look at the different ways that we can count to see if we can improve that. And we can talk about that in the board meeting next June.
Thank you. Now I've got hundreds of people wanting to talk now. I've got Rebecca and Colin. Do you want to come in on that particular point before I go to Mark and Ruth? Yes, Rebecca.
I did actually, just on levels of foodborne disease. I just wanted to remind the board how much support we've provided for food businesses during the past 6 to 9 months, particularly for hospitality businesses who've had to close down and then restart. And those have been some of the most well-used sections of our website. And, we've also continued to put a lot of thought into helping people keep food safe at home. So we've really tried to adjust our support and communications during this period to really minimise the additional risks that there might be.
Thank you for that. And there's some excellent data in this business performance pack on our...
Could I add to that, Heather? Just
yes,
by saying in terms of the number of incidents, in quarter one, we saw quite a reduced number. Now in quarter two, they're down by 12% compared with last year. And interestingly, during quarter three, during the English lockdown, again, we've seen a reduction in the number of incidents. So it does seem to track fairly clearly linked to the level of activities.
Thank you. Mark and then Ruth.
Thanks, Emma. I know you said you wanted local authority questions on the next one. I've got a specific question about one of these slides, which maybe you would indulge me with just asking now. If you think it's appropriate, then we can look into the next one.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mark, but I can't hear you properly. Can anybody else hear you? No. It might be your connection.
Okay. Go to Ruth and I'll play.
If you send me the question on chat, I'll make sure we use it. Ruth.
Thank you. I just actually wanted to say well done in terms of the social media and guidance activity that Rebecca mentioned earlier. It's obviously a crucial part of managing the COVID response is making sure the industry has access to all the relevant materials. So it's a really impressive effort. And my question really is, are we doing any evaluation of how it was used and using it to inform our development of guidance for the future? Have we done any post hoc evaluation?
Stephen, would you have any insight in that at this stage, or is it a bit early?
It's probably a little bit early to say. What we do know, and particularly on the checklist, you'll see there that's one of the most downloaded pieces of content that we produce. So clearly we hit a sweet spot in terms of the demand and what was needed. But we will look at we will work with colleagues in regulated compliance and elsewhere to see how that's being used and how that can help shape our approach in future. What we've been able to do is use some of the tracking that's come in from the horizon scanning to predict and see where the need is going to be, in particular around businesses restarting and businesses reshaping their operating model. So I guess we will continue to use that approach to see where there will be the demand for a particular type of guidance at a particular point in time. But that's worked really well. And I think the way that those assets have performed indicates that the approach was the right one.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Emily, and then I've got Mark's questions.
Thank you. I just wanted to come in on that as well, because I'm so proud of what we've done on the communications front. So I just want to say a little bit more. It was informed by our horizon scanning work back in the spring, which we set up rapidly in response to COVID-19, and we could see these issues emerging, and we responded with these communications. And secondly, the campaign we ran, which was called Here to Help, won a prize from the Government Communication Service as the best campaign, which we're just extremely proud of. And thirdly, perhaps Stephen was too shy to say, but we do apply quite rigorous evaluation to all our communications work. So we will be taking on board any lessons we can.
Thank you for that. The questions that Mark had, the first one was on the local authority performance slides. Largely, we are talking about food hygiene performance, but he just flagged that the escalation procedure, this is on slide 8, references that we have Northamptonshire County Council as one of the 2 local authorities at stage 3. So wanting to be sure that about the process being about standards as well as about hygiene. I'm just looking, is that Maria or is it Rebecca?
Yes, I can pick that up, Heather.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Heather, that's exactly right. We do monitor food standards as well, and because the problems in Northampton were so exceptional, we had to raise those to our level 3 of our escalation process.
Thank you for that. Mark's other question was about diversity. It's really good to see Emily's comments about our work in the area of diversity. He was intrigued by the age profile. Is there anything in the kind of work we do and the kind of roles we have which puts off people at the start of their career? I should hope not, but it's a very valid question.
Shall I come in on that?
Emily.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Mark, for the question. So the age profile in the FSA is really interesting and really unusual. So in our field operations, as Colin said, over 3/4 are above the age of 50. And actually, we do have a number of people over 70 who are still working as meat hygiene inspectors. So, very, very experienced people who've been doing the job for many, many, many years. We also, other areas, do want experts. So, for example, I do a coffee morning with new starters every month. So I've probably met 40 or 50 people in the last 4 months who've just started the FSA. And amongst them include scientists, a radiologist from the NHS, ex-police officers who have done their 30 years service and are now coming to help us do intelligence collection, people who've got PhDs, various people who worked in other parts of government. There's a huge range of people. We also have, and I've met them, quite a few people who've just come out of university. So they've just done an environmental health degree or they've just done a microbiology degree. And they've joined us. So my sense is that we have quite a range and we're not putting off the career starters. We also run internship programs into our science directorate for current students, particularly postgraduate students who come and work with us for a bit. And in fact, I've met 1 or 2 who did that for a year and then finished their degrees and then came back to us because they enjoyed it so much.
Thank you. Unless Mark waves at me, I'm going to think that his questions are answered. They were. Colm, I'll give you the last word on this report.
Yeah, and it's not strictly on the report, but it's related to it. ARAC were just literally informed in the last 24 hours that the CNAG has now certified the annual report and accounts and are now ready for laying at Westminster. We'd actually sort of set a date for much closer to Christmas, to be perfectly honest. We have till the end of January. And as board members will be aware, it has been a fairly torturous time. But fantastic work done by within Chris's world there, by particularly Martin Brewer, Liz Fishley and the team. So congratulations and thank you so much to them for all of the work they've done to bring that to a close.
Thank you for that, Colm. There is some really super content in this performance report. It really is impressive, the way that we've switched, focused and delivered results in such challenging circumstances. So I think the whole board would endorse not just the thanks for getting the annual report and accounts signed off, but for the progress on so many fronts. We will move on to the report on local authority delivery and performance. Maria is going to take us through this together with Michael Jackson. Hello, Michael, welcome, who's head of our Regulatory Compliance Division. Maria, over to you.
Thank you very much, Heather. Under normal circumstances, we would be providing an annual report to the board on the performance of local authorities in the 3 countries. However, because this year has been so exceptional, I wanted to give the board some more reassurance around the actions that we have taken, both the FSA and local authorities, to make sure that food safety priorities have continued to be delivered throughout the pandemic. I also wanted in the paper to give the board a flavour of how the steps we have taken will pave the way for modernising the delivery of official controls in the longer term. During the COVID pandemic, we were very clear on what we expected local authorities to do. Continue to deliver the controls that are prescribed in legislation. So, for example, import controls, approval of businesses that are producing products for animal origin. Also urgent reactive work, so incidents and outbreaks. And following up on local intelligence where businesses changed how they were operating, especially if their food hygiene ratings were below 3. We said to local authorities that planned inspections that were due for lower risk businesses could be deferred. And we've explained why we did that in the paper. We also put in place a reporting mechanism for local authorities to alert us immediately if they couldn't deliver on these core activities. Taking this approach is within our risk appetite if local authorities continue to deliver the controls, but we remain alert to the pressures that they are under and the pressures that are within the system. We're not unduly alarmed in the short term during the COVID response. At the moment, 5 local authorities have informed us that they are not following our expectations due to prioritisation of COVID activities. Just wider then, in order to help local authorities, we have fast-tracked our Competency Framework. As you know, you've heard about that before, to try to start to alleviate some staffing pressures. We've also engaged across Whitehall, and Paul will say a few words about that work. And we've also engaged directly with local authority chief executives to highlight our concerns. So I'm asking the board to endorse the continuation of our approach until June, as it is aligned with our longer term direction of travel within the Achieving Business Compliance programme. I also want to assure the board that we're working hard to improve our mechanism for reporting local authority activities. We want to get relevant and timely information to make sure that it assists our decision making. So before I invite questions, I'm going to hand over to Paul to say a few words.
Thank you, Maria. And as Maria said, I just want to paint a little context around the wider conversations we're having across Whitehall, in particular with our colleagues in MHCLG and LGA, where I'm conscious there are particular issues around the English local authorities, but it does have, we're setting it in the wider 3-country working as well. And in the first instance, we worked with MHCLG to support their bid into the spending review, and I imagine there are similar conversations going on in MHCLG as we've just had here in this business committee about there having been some additional funding, but still, as Maria says, still left with some pressures. We're having conversations with our fellow central regulators because one of the things that is emerging is the wider pressure on regulatory services is not limited just to those connected to our areas of responsibility. And the welcome piece of this pressure is that there is an increasing focus across government. MHCLG are driving a process of the various central regulators coming together to understand the multiplicity of different asks that is now being pressed down onto local authorities. So that in addition to the work that Maria is talking around in our particular area, what we're also doing is engaging on that case for understanding how these different demands on local authority resources are aggregating in the round, so that we've got a clearer picture and we can understand how we can make that effective. It's in this process of getting that all on that perspective in the round and plugging into a task and finish group that MHCLG has underway is at a relatively early stage. But I just wanted to let the committee know that that's underway, and I can see my internet connection is unstable, so I'll probably use that as my moment to draw my comments to a close.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Maria. Mark.
I'm going to try again because I've changed my input device. Is that better?
We can hear you really clearly now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank goodness for that. Thank you. I think there's a huge amount in this report, and I'm really grateful to you for it. I can, someone who sits in a local authority, I can feel the pressures on local authority colleagues in trying to deliver some of this work. And I think that the fact that we've recognised that actually will go a long way to continuing to cement the relationships that we have with those local authorities. I do have a couple of questions, if I may. There is a comment in the report about local authorities effectively all pursuing the same staff. And I know there is a limited pool of staff, but actually this is almost a product of reducing the number of staff delivering this work. It becomes less attractive for people to take these qualifications. I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do to try and reverse that trend. The other issue, there are a number of things I could say, but my key issue really is also around the food hygiene ratings scheme, because I can see in here we want to continue with the kind of divergence that we're doing at the moment, but I am concerned about the food hygiene rating scheme. Firstly, in relation to the point Timothy raised around confidence, but actually there's a real business competitive issue in terms of if you can't get your premises assessed and can't get your food hygiene rating, actually that can put you at a really significant business disadvantage, and it can prevent you joining some of the platforms for supply and so on. So I just wonder whether that is still the appropriate direction in terms of particularly that issue.
Thank you for that, Mark. I'm going to invite some comments from others because there's going to be lots to talk about here. Margaret and then Peter, and then we'll catch up.
Maria, it's a really comprehensive report. Thank you so much. It's great. Wondered how concerned you are about post-COVID, and this is a long-term thing, pulling the LAs back to start taking on board much of the work they did pre-COVID when they're so stretched. I think that is going to be incredibly difficult, also at a time when hopefully we'll be back on the mandatory display of FHRS in England work. Yes, absolutely endorsing the way you're going at the moment. I just wondered also, question number 2, about the medium-term options that you raise on page 42. And I just wondered whether you were pushing ahead when we may find things that we hadn't anticipated in February and March due to EU transition, and whether we should push that a little bit down the line, and what you thought about that.
Thank you, Margaret. And Peter.
My question relates to paragraph 6.7, where you're starting to look at the longer term, and you refer to aspiring to focus more on outcomes. I'm always in favour of looking at outcomes, but the difficulty is usually gathering the data on a good comparative basis. And I'm just wondering where your thinking is about the kind of data and the way of collecting it, and also the timescales. Are we talking, when we say aspiration, about something quite a long way ahead, or something you're really working on now?
Maria, do you want to start and bring other colleagues in as you wish?
Yes, please, Heather. I'll attempt to answer some of the questions. In relation to Mark's questions, for the local authorities pursuing the same staff, absolutely, Mark, there's a big issue, and we're seeing that played out across the country. One of the things that will help is our new competency framework, and that allows more people with different qualifications to come into the system and to do certain tasks and activities. Now, we had fast-tracked that consultation, and there is a lot of nervousness from local authorities about what the practicalities of that will be. We're working our way through that and providing the reassurance for them, but we will resolve that, and from about February on, we will open up the potential for others to move into this space. And then in relation to the food hygiene rating, I think the main difficulty in terms of the food hygiene rating is that bracket where we would say category C businesses, so the big chunk of premises that sit in the category C of C, inspected every 18 months or so. Those are, in general, catering businesses that we would want physical inspections to be carried out in. And there are a large number of those businesses. So we would be encouraging local authorities as much as possible to start to get back into those businesses and start to deliver food hygiene ratings for those premises. I'm sure Michael will want to say more on that. There are other businesses that we do not believe should be within the food hygiene rating scheme. We haven't explored that in any depth whatsoever, but for some of those low risk categories, Ds and Ds, some of them a food hygiene rating may not even be particularly relevant for them. So that's part of our longer term conversation with local authorities, and they agree with that as well. Post-COVID, we will have to push a reset button, Margaret, because there's no point in pushing local authorities to try to catch up with their backlog. It just doesn't make sense. So, for example, for a category A business, it would be inspected every 6 months. So a category A business may completely miss one inspection cycle. And I think that's something that we're just going to have to live with. And particularly for those high-risk businesses, we have been asking local authorities to continue with the inspection cycle for those businesses anyway. So at worst, we believe that the businesses will only miss one inspection cycle, but they will start to then go on to a refreshed and renewed inspection cycle again. And then, yes, the medium-term issues, we're going to have to think very carefully about. Peter is right on those. It's important for us, and I think Margaret mentioned it, to just reassess where we are at the end of March and see what the lay of the land is. And in the meantime, continue to listen to local authorities as well and hear what they're telling us about their pressures. And then we will obviously come back to the board on some of those, some of our thinking around the medium term. And outcomes, it's really important for us to shift towards outcome-based reporting for local authorities. And what we're thinking there is that what we really want to see from local authorities is that they bring businesses into compliance. They don't just keep, returning to businesses and telling them to do the same things and getting them to make the same improvements. What we want to see is the food hygiene rating compliance be driven up in the longer term. And that's a really good indicator for us, because we can see then that local authorities are going back and continuing to go back to businesses to rectify the problems so that the business's hygiene rating will improve.
It's worth us also remembering that we've got quite a long way in thinking about the data sources and starting to build some of that capacity, create some of the frameworks for it. We already are on record as a board of saying that we would like local authority performance data to be publicly available. We know how often from the press cuts we receive, FHRS ratings appear in the local press. We don't want to put an undue additional expectation on local authorities. So it has to sit hand in hand with what Paul has said about pressure across Whitehall to get this sort of whole inspection and regulatory regime at the local authority level properly resourced and properly supported. But nevertheless, sort of local public pressure on local authorities to encourage them to focus their resources on the matters connected to public health is really important. So I don't want us to lose sight of that commitment to transparency around local authority performance in more real time. We know we could get there because we'd worked out how to do it. We've just been knocked off track by this virus. Dave.
Thanks, Heather. I suppose just really focusing again back on the local authority performance, and I guess everything that's been said in this meeting from when we were talking about the investment projects that were being impacted through our spending review and the performance report and now this report. I guess periods of great stress shine great lights on systems, and they will expose those which are struggling to cope. We've known for a very long time that our local authority infrastructure is struggling to cope, but the fantastic work of the dedicated individuals that work in those environmental services departments and standards departments have papered over those cracks. And I guess this period has shown that those cracks, it's no longer sustainable to do that. So I just really welcome that we're going to continue the investment in the ABC programme through even though we've had a lighter spending review than we'd like. I'd also encourage us to not only invest resource, but pace and particularly tackle some of those more challenging issues that are going to actually potentially give us the greatest benefit around those people who are eligible to undertake the controls, the use of second and third party audits, some of the, I suppose, the things that have been deemed a little bit untouchable in the past and have probably caused us to pause a little longer. It's not just been COVID that slowed down our regulatory reform. It has been some of those challenges to overcome. And this may well give us the impetus. And one additional bit of information which may give us some further evidence is that I've sat on the board now for 5 years. Apart from Heather, I'm the old man of the board. And every year we kind of see the numbers going down. We look in Annex 2, sort of down 1% year on year, down 2% year on year. And you kind of think, oh, that's not too bad. It's only 1 or 2%. it would be really useful to pick that information up over the last 5 years, and we'll probably see that in many areas cumulatively we may have dropped 10, 15, 25% in our inspection capability and our inspection resource over that time. So I'd really encourage a little bit of work to be done to try and understand those longer term trends as well as the annual ones to support the activity that Maria and her team are trying to now deliver in the ABC programme. Thank you.
Dave, thank you for that. I am not the old man of the board. And just to pick up on that, we should never lose sight of that really good content in the National Audit Report last year, which gave us a lot of that longer term trend data. Well, replayed our longer term trend data, but it's a really good source of the sort of the 4 or 5 year snapshot that you were talking about there, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. And if I can just sort of comment on that last point, the ARAC are going to be looking, and we did talk about this at our last meeting, and early in the new year we will be looking with the National Audit Office at that report and how we're actually progressing against those things which fall within our remit. I suppose the point I wanted to make, and there is one question specifically in here, but it's really the problems that are being encountered, and there's a lot of talk around the pressures on local government through COVID. But of course, these problems have been building, as Dave has just said, for a long time now, and COVID has exacerbated it, but they were there. So I am pleased with this paper. It's very comprehensive. And for me, it speaks about much more of a risk-assessed approach to this going forward, and actually bringing more skills and so forth in to make that problem a little bit less. As I look forward and we come out of COVID, hopefully in the course of this year, other problems will be faced in different parts of the country by local government. Certainly in Northern Ireland, there'll be a significant amount of additional resource around port inspections and things like that they haven't had to do up until now. So the resource isn't going to get any easier. So I do, and I'd echo some of Dave's comments there, that if we can pick the pace up on some of this stuff, it would be really beneficial, because this problem isn't going to get any easier. The specific question I have, and it goes back to the performance report, and we have used stage 3 of the powers available to us in just 2 local authorities in Birmingham and Northamptonshire. Just a question in terms of, Emily has written to the chief execs of those councils. What sort of response have we had from them, and what can we do to help those 2 particular councils?
Thank you, Colin. Emily can come back on that, and then I think Julie's going to get the last word.
Thank you. So on that last point, Colin, although I had written to Northamptonshire and Birmingham, I think the important thing to remember is that we had been assessing them against the old world of the Food Law Code of Practice and what we had been expecting. And actually the reason why they'd fallen behind was because they weren't doing their low priority inspections. They had been putting all of their resource into the highest priority work. Now, actually, since April, May, that's exactly what we've been asking local authorities to do. So we have been in very close touch with those 2 local authorities to find out how they're doing, but we don't think it's appropriate to carry on that performance management step, because actually they you could argue that they were ahead of everything else, of the others, in terms of having to prioritise resource. I just wanted to make a couple of other comments. We're surfing around the edge of this question about risk appetite for the organisation and for the food safety and standards system. Now, we consider that the steps that we took in July to set out what the absolute minimum of interventions were with those local authorities going into food businesses is at the edge of our risk appetite. We have gone as far as we can. We have reduced our expectations in a number of areas. But if we were to go beyond what Maria said, which is losing more than 1 inspection cycle, we think that is would have a material effect on food safety around the country. So we have gained appreciation from local authorities, and actually thanks from central government too, because we took that step and we did alleviate pressure. And I think that was completely necessary. And respectful of the other priorities that local authorities have and the resources that they've got available to them. But I just want to be really clear, we are now at the edge of that risk appetite, and we will be looking extremely closely to see how local authorities can manage against that. Now, as Maria said, at the moment, we only have 5 that are struggling, that have told us, and we're going to be going in as supportive a way as possible to see what we can do to help. But the last point I wanted to make was about pace. what we're seeing here will be a very slow burn of a situation. This question about losing one inspection in a cycle, for some of those businesses, that's once every 3 years. For some of those businesses, that's once every 6 months. So this is something that's going to happen over quite a slow period. The issue we've got in terms of reform is that to reform the Food Law Code of Practice, if we go too fast, we are not able to embed that sufficiently with all of the stakeholders that we've got to move with us. So we have 3 sets of ministers that need to agree to the changes and 400 local authorities that need to implement them. So we are going at quite some pace on that. So the Competency Framework is the first example, which will feed into the Food Law Code of Practice. And we're doing quite a limited time consultation on that. But already we're seeing some anxiety from local authorities, particularly environmental health officers, about what we're doing. So we are going to go swiftly, but we will not be going at a ridiculous pace, because we have to make sure this is thought through and embedded for the long term.
Thank you for that, Emily. Julie, and then Ruth.
Thank you very much. I just wanted, for completeness, to mention Wales. And so the situation in Wales is covered in here and in the conversation, but it's worth just drawing out the fact that it is slightly different in Wales. The situation is slightly different. Some of the activities the local authorities are undertaking through COVID is different compared with what we might see in England. However, having said that, overall at a summary level, the local authorities also remain under severe pressure of resources. So the general points being made apply, even if the local responses are different. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Ruth.
Thank you. Just to emphasise, first of all, I'm grateful for the update, and it's really helpful to see the scale of impact on local authorities. I was grateful for Emily's reassurance that we're absolutely clear that we have been very helpful, proportionate in supporting local authorities in the current situation that they've had to deal with. But we do need to come back to having confidence that we have a robust, comprehensive system of controls. I think we need to be very clear that we will follow up on the 5 that are not able to maintain that lower level of expectation, and really keep a very close eye on whether others are starting to fall into that situation as well as we move through the next phase of the COVID response. So welcome the reassurance, but I think it's something that as a board we really do need to stay close to.
Thank you, Ruth. I do think this is a really important paper for us to spend so much time on. I was going to try and sum it up. I think what we're saying is we do recognise just how challenging it has been, and we really appreciate the efforts that local authorities have made in delivering their statutory food functions, as well as protecting their communities from COVID-19 over the last 9 months or so. And that this has had an unprecedented impact on the ability of local authorities to cover the full range of their normal duties and responsibilities. But the first thing for the board to say is that we recognise and appreciate those extraordinary efforts of local authorities, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, to help ensure that food's safe and that public health is protected. We are concerned about the strain that the system is under. And if you look at those snapshots in August and October, they give us reason for concern, although with 90% of the local authorities surveyed saying that they were coping, we can take some small level of comfort from that, but we know that there is this further to go. And I think the proactive action of the Chief Executive in writing to local authorities where we're concerned about whether they've got enough resource is the right step to take and the right supportive step to take, as well as ensuring that assurance is there for us and for the public. The board is confirming that we should continue with our advice around targeting scarce resources at the most high-risk premises through until June next year. But we will continue to monitor these snapshot survey results over the coming months to see whether there's any unwelcome change in the number of local authorities who are struggling to meet those minimum requirements. We have, as Ruth has just said, we have to be confident that those minimum levels of assurance are being delivered and achieved, and we want to be unequivocal about that as a board. Looking to the future, I think we would like to particularly endorse the importance of a cross-Whitehall approach to the resource challenge that there is in local authorities. That was a critical finding of the NAO report last year. It's something this board has long said, and we welcome the fact that other parts of government are now willing to work on this and to recognise the scale of the challenge and its consequences if we don't address it. We do think that actually all that we've seen through COVID-19 as a board does give renewed impetus to our strategic drive for regulatory reform. I think as a board, we're recognising the points about the pace with which we can reform the Food Law Code of Practice, and that's one of our main levers in being able to reposition the way that reform can go forward, but it's the right direction to take over a sensible time frame. We want a system that's going to target scarce resources where a premises-based inspection is going to be the most effective way to mitigate risk. And we want a system where intelligence gathering can very speedily and effectively provoke a reactive local authority response. Those have always been in our minds as we've talked about and move forward with regulatory reform, as has been the aspiration to work with businesses so that we can get assurance from their methods of mitigating and managing risk, rather than assuming that you can only deliver assurance by on-site inspection at the local business level. That is important, but it's nowhere near the only component of an effective future regulatory regime. So on that basis, I think we are happy to accept the direction that Maria has very clearly set out in this paper, but use it as that further momentum to drive our regulatory reform ambitions in the future. Thank you very much for all the hard work that's going on into keeping that system running effectively in difficult circumstances. We'll move on to our last paper for today, which is the annual update on the National Food Crime Unit. We have Colin and we're joined by Darren Davies, who somewhere I should be able to see him quite soon. There he is. Welcome, Darren. I'll hand over to them to introduce or give us some highlights from their paper.
Thank you very much, Heather. I'll just introduce the paper briefly, and then Darren and I will seek to field your questions. So this is the annual update, as you've said. It gives a synopsis of the last year. It also includes, however, a summary of the internal report that was undertaken within the last year, and I'd like to thank Mark, one of the board members, for his oversight and constructive challenge in that piece of work. Some of the activities within the last year that are worth drawing out by way of introduction is the progressing of the Memorandum of Understanding with the Crown Prosecution Service. And as discussed at the board in September, the revised strategic threat assessment and the related control strategy. Paper outlines some of the main cases that the unit has been involved in, and also the other strands of operational activity, and some of the details, a flavor, if you like, of the cases being covered are in the appended case studies. Also on top of that, we've highlighted in the appendices the number and different types of disruptions. And those are now graded in a standard methodology used across law enforcement. And that's a way of starting to show the impact that the unit is having. And earlier in the meeting, we obviously discussed the Performance and Resources Report. We're now at a point where we have sufficient data for NFCU so as to be able to contribute to that report going forward. And we're planning to do so in Q3 of this year and onwards. I think it's also worth highlighting in what has obviously been a very unique year that NFCU colleagues have played a part in the contributions to the COVID response. Quite a significant number playing their part in the briefing cell for the incident response. And also taking that opportunity to get to know and be more familiar and more integrated with the agency as a whole. In parallel with that, they've also been preparing for the end of the transition period. And that's included increasing our understanding of any change in the threat or the risk landscape to food crime as the UK develops new trading relationships outside the EU. Still on the agenda is, of course, DNP and establishing a broader based cross-Whitehall approach has been a key priority for us this year. And on top of that, the unit is one of the primary areas for the unit going forward, as highlighted in the recommendations of the internal review, is of course the outstanding issue of the securing of powers and formalizing or cementing our mandate for the unit. Just in terms of the internal review itself, it was undertaken by a subject matter expert who, working with staff, indeed he interviewed over half the staff to get their views. And there are 9 recommendations summarized in the report. And we feel that progressing those recommendations will add constructively to the unit's development. So in summary, we're seeking the board's endorsement for the direction of travel. We're conscious that there is an external review due at the 3-year mark in the spring of 2022. But that concludes my introductory comments. Heather.
Colin, thank you very much. And I would like to just add the board's thanks for that interim review to Jerry Saville coming in to assist with that. He's an associate with HMIC FRS and was our critical friend. Mark, I thought I might ask you to comment first.
Thank you, Heather. I was just trying to find a way of putting my hand up. So, from my perspective, it was fascinating to be involved in that review, and actually a privilege. And thank you to those who accommodated me in doing that. It gave me a real insight into the unit that I didn't fully have before that. I think the unit, since it was formed, has made significant strides forward, both in terms of what it's capable of doing and also the relationships that it's built with partners across the piece. There is one aspect of it that I particularly wanted to draw out, if I may, and that you will have seen in the report that it has highlighted the sort of 4 strands of work of the unit. And I think when you have a unit that's called a crime unit, there is a tendency almost to think that this unit should be focusing on prosecuting people and bringing people to justice. And that is an important aspect of what they need to do. But I think the prevention and the protection elements are much more difficult to measure, but actually potentially much more important. If we can prevent fraud, then we prevent victims of fraud, and we don't have to prosecute. Obviously, part of prevention is having an effective deterrent, and prosecution is part of that effective deterrent. So it's not something we can leave aside altogether, but I just want to, if you like, share my enthusiasm for protection and prevention, and suggest that pursuit is not everything in this remit.
Thank you for that, Mark. Very well reminded for all of us. The other thing that I think is important to note is that we are still frustrated in terms of the ability to deliver the full capability of the food crime unit by us not having those small number of PACE powers that we need for the unit to be able to operate properly, independently, and not to be dependent on the kindness of other forces to lend their powers and work with us in important cases. And that is really frustrating that we have not yet been able to secure government agreement to giving us those powers. It is hard to know why not, since the Treasury and the government backed the expansion of the NFCU as a critical part of our Brexit readiness planning, and also recognising the need to continue to follow through on the lessons learned from the horsemeat saga. And as the work of the unit has shown, we have complex and challenging, particularly fraud cases to pursue, which reach a long way and have major implications. They take a lot of resource and a lot of time to bring to a conclusion, but not having the powers that we need under PACE is a frustration to us in being able to accelerate our progress in those areas as well. It's very disappointing. Just looking to see if there were any more comment. Colin.
Just Chair, thank you, and thank you, Darren and Colin, for the paper. Really good work being done. Just one question for me, and there's reference in a little bit of staff turnover, which seems to be a concern, and it is not unrelated to the comments that Heather has just made. And I see that we're planning within the recommendations to do some benchmarking against regional organised crime units who obviously have much greater powers than we do. What more can we as an FSA board do to support you, to give you what you need in the absence of the PACE powers, to help you to get that staff satisfaction to where it needs to be, at least in the short term?
Yeah, if I come in and then turn it to Darren, I mean, continued support from the board and business committee is really welcomed. Obviously, you're getting a window as to into what we're doing. And when we look at the reasons why people are leaving, it's partly because of frustration that they're not able to fully do their job because they haven't got the powers. But it's also partly because they've gone on to other roles, sometimes within the agency or promoted elsewhere out with the agency. So it is a mixed picture and we are looking at it, but continued support for the board for the direction of travel would really be very welcome. And I know that is a commitment you've given. Darren?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. I would echo Colin's comments, Colin. There's been varied reasons for people obviously leaving the unit. And as Colin said, quite a few have left on promotion and have been developed as a consequence of what we're doing in the unit. So that shouldn't be lost. But I think it is fair to say people have got some concerns about privately on an individual basis about the longevity of the unit, given the powers aren't coming through. They're starting to interpret that in a slightly obtuse way, I suppose, by thinking the unit hasn't got a future potentially, having seen that delay in the process. But on a similar juncture, we've had a big response rate on the staff survey recently, and we're keen to see the outcomes of that. But I think the discussions at the board today, the discussions Emily and Colin have recently had with the team, giving them some of those assurances and the small progress we are making in terms of getting the right kind of noises and support around the powers is all going to help and get to the heart of giving people the assurance they need, really.
Thank you, Darren. Emily?
I just wanted to add to Darren's comments, which is that going back to the point I made right at the start of the meeting about our spending review settlement, because our baseline, the EU exit money has been folded into our baseline now, the funding for the unit is now secure. We don't have to rebid for it. And that's quite a substantial turning point, really, I think, for NFCU. It is now absolutely part and parcel of the FSA, and it is part of our funding arrangements.
Thank you for that reminder. That is a really important point.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say that, and that did come through when Emily spoke to staff recently, that the feedback we had was, the point that Emily made there was quite reassuring for them to get that feeling that it wasn't a temporary fixture, it's here for the long game, really. So the reviews sometimes add a bit of uncertainty to staff who are feeling a little insecure, but I think lots of those things we just discussed have provided some assurance and will give staff confidence in the future for sure.
It's always incredibly reassuring to read a review report which says talented, inspiring and committed members of staff. And I think the annexes to this paper really do pull out how complex and time-consuming and challenging and painstaking the job of this crime unit is in really tackling major criminality. So we really do appreciate it. This board fought quite hard to secure an expanded NFCU, so we are not going to lose hold of it. Anything else from board members in terms of this annual update? Ruth?
Well, just to echo, it's really encouraging to see the result of the review and to get such a good update of the work of the unit. I just wanted to pick up the situation with regard to DNP. Obviously, further tragic deaths and some good work on behalf of the unit in terms of trying to restrict availability of the product. Colin mentioned, and it's listed as one of the ongoing challenges, get cross-government action on this. And I noticed in the body of the report, it talks about the Home Office and Public Health England, which of course we know Public Health England is being transformed into a new agency. Are we confident we have some input from PHE as it is now, and will this be picked up through the new arrangements?
Let Colin come in on that, although I think from my perspective, from the engagement I've had with this, ministerial commitment in the Home Office is the absolutely critical element to being able to secure a better outcome on DMP. It ought not to be left to the FSA alone to be trying to tackle this this really big problem. Colin.
Yes, and that's very much where we've been coming from in terms of engagement, primarily with Home Office, but also pulling in other partners, Ruth. And Darren's been involved in a number of discussions in respect of that. I'll let him come in and give a bit more colour to that.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. It's a really good point, Ruth. And we've had 2 or 3 cross sort of Whitehall meetings now, which the Home Office have hosted and chaired. So I think perhaps it's taken a while to get there, but the relevant parties are around the table now trying to discuss a more joined-up approach. One of the recent elements of that, for example, has been to seek some amendments to the Poisons Act to get DNP designated as a poison under the Poisons Act. So that's not going to be a panacea in itself, but it's just one example of tightening a number of measures that should assist in us collectively tackling DMP. But of course, tragically, lots of illegal substances are bought and are available through various platforms. So I'm not suggesting for a minute we can eradicate its availability, but lots of the steps we can take collectively should improve the position we're currently in. It's early-ish days. There's been 3 forums so far where everyone's together, but we're determined to try and keep driving that to get a better picture than we've currently got, that's for sure.
Thank you. I think that is it. In which case, we will draw our business committee meeting to a close. There wasn't any other business, so it simply remains to say that the next FSA business committee meeting will take place on the 10th of March 2021 at 9:30 by Zoom again. And the next FSA board meeting is the day before that, Tuesday the 9th of March at 9:30, again by Zoom. So we should look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much.